I guess we're back on the conversation that Yu-Gi-Oh's dying. Cool. So, for those wondering, Shiggy's made a tweet. I'm not going to put it on here because she put in the tweet that she might delete it, so she might not want it out there. But she asked pretty vaguely what people think the future of Yu-Gi-Oh is going to be. And that was a little confusing for some people, myself included. House of Champs kind of clarified in the comments what he assumed she was talking about, namely that the products over the last 3 years have been pretty bad, and the best products of the year every year have usually been the megatins, and the last three megatins have all kind of been duds. And a lot of stores are dropping Yu-Gi-Oh, and that has people concerned that Yu-Gi-Oh is on the decline. I think that there is some merit to the idea that Yu-Gi-Oh is on the decline, if only to say that we are entering into sort of a slump in terms of the existence of Yu-Gi-Oh and its popularity. Now, obviously, I think Yu-Gi-Oh peaked back in like the mid 2000s probably, and we've sort of been chasing that high of relevance ever since. I feel like in recent years, Yu-Gi-Oh has been getting pretty close to matching the same level of popularity that it had back in the 2000s. But unfortunately, you're sort of stuck dealing with the Yu-Gi-Oh that we're stuck with, so to speak. A lot of people have been sort of peddling older formats, which is usually not a good sign when like older formats are really popular. But I think we're sort of uniquely positioned when it comes to older formats doing well, because that's not necessarily a sign that Yu-Gi-Oh is doing bad. It's a sign that Konami has started doing something good, right? So up until I think 2020 or 2021, anytime a event was done using an older format or some type of alternative format, you couldn't sanction it. It was not official. Like tournament stores maybe had their little, hush hush, this is official tournament type of deal. But ultimately you couldn't hold those and have them openly be older formats. So Konami saw a huge surge in people playing older formats. Originally it was GOAT format. I think that again this is sort of one of those cyclical things that sort of happens. GOAT used to be the go-to legacy format for people to play, and when Konami first introduced sanctioned old format tournaments, GOAT was sort of the one they gravitated towards. But as history of Yu-Gi-Oh started progressing, and as SEMO and MBT and other people started sort of exploring the other formats that exist in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, it became obvious that there was another contender for a format that was really good, and that was Edison format, which took place at SJC Edison. And it's a 2010 format, which sort of tracks with where I guess things have progressed, because I believe Edison was after synchros had been introduced, but before Xyz had been introduced. So I think it's sort of showing a progression in how people view old school Yu-Gi-Oh. There was a point in time up until I would say a few years ago where the only things people would have considered old school were DM, i.e. Duel Monsters, and GX. I feel like now we're starting to see more people consider 5Ds also old school Yu-Gi-Oh. And I think that's partly due to the fact that the existence of something like History of Yu-Gi-Oh has sort of shown people what is out there, all of the possible options of formats that you can sort of obsess over. And when you have this wealth of information and sort of windows into what these formats were like, people can start to get an idea of what formats during the synchro era were actually fun and worth playing. Now, why synchro specifically? I think that we finally reached the point where people have started to sort of shave this idea that synchros ruined the game. Synchros gave Yu-Gi-Oh an identity that Magic and Pokemon did not have. It made them distinct from other games. And being able to play with synchros but not having the absolute fustercluck of a format that we currently exist in, and the type of format that so many other formats are from pretty much the Xyz era on, you start to see, there's a lot to enjoy with Edison format, because people want the sort of combo heavy play style that Yu-Gi-Oh is known for, but they don't want to have to learn the entire card base and memorize every major deck's combo in order to be able to sort of hold their own against every deck in the format. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to go back to an older format. Now, there are a lot of legacy formats that have seen consistent play over the years, and I think in the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to see a shift in what legacy format is being played the most. And I imagine at a certain point, people are going to start considering Xyz also old school Yu-Gi-Oh. In the same way that like what was considered classic rock is sort of being moved forward. Like, I know that this may shock a lot of people, but there's going to come a point where songs that were released in the 90s, rock songs that were released in the 90s, are going to be considered old school rock, classic rock. Like, at what point does, Nirvana start being considered classic? That's not necessarily something that we can define, but once that happens, you know that there's a shift in the paradigm, right? And I feel like a shift in the paradigm coincided perfectly with Konami allowing for these types of tournaments to be sanctioned. Because let's put it to you this way, the Edison format tournament that fired at one of the more recent YCSs saw similar entry numbers to the actual main event. Like, a similar number of people showed up strictly to play Edison as showed up to play in the actual main event. And that's crazy. That's unbelievable. So the fact that these old formats are so popular is not necessarily the canary in the coal mine that some people might think it is, because there's extenuating circumstances. The fact that we now have Time Wizard events being sanctioned, the fact that they're not just being sanctioned at locals, but like you can go to a YCS and compete at a YCS level, but the format is a format from 2010. And the pricing is insane. Like the mats that they've been doing for these old events featuring like old classic cards, like they look amazing. The fact is that they are heavily incentivizing people to play these older formats. And that has me personally hopeful that things are going to move in the direction of, you know, these formats receiving support. Obviously, you can't change what was available in the format, but seeing cards from that format reprinted just because they're going to see play in those tournaments, having older cards from those time periods being reprinted and maybe even like given an update to their text, like not necessarily an errata in the sense that like we're going to change how the card works, but an errata in the sense that we're going to give it problem solving card text. And maybe the problem with doing stuff like that is that they're going to inevitably change how the card works. Like just about every time that they've done that, they've made modifications to the way the card actually functions. which is not going to make it a very good copy to be playing in those tournaments, because a lot of people really like to play with like the text that was on the cards at the time that this format was played. But that's not required. You're not required to play, you know, a printing of Sangan from that era in order to play in the tournament. You can play any copy. You can play one that has current errata that was printed yesterday. But there are people that, consider that to be something that needs to be taken care of. So I don't think that the older formats being popular is necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that it's like a bad omen. But I also don't think that the product's not selling well is a bad thing either. Like, I think this year in particular, being the 25th anniversary of the franchise, is also a bit of a weird place to be. I really think that a lot of products are held down by the fact that they're sort of held up by the quarter century secret rares, and a lot of them are trying to sort of pander to the people that were interested in celebrating Yu-Gi-Oh's 25th anniversary. The 25th anniversary Legendary Collection was really cool and was one of the best-selling products of the year, which says a lot because it really only catered towards nostalgic players. There's really not a lot in that product for a modern player. Like certain staple cards or power cards of the day are from that era, things like Skill Drain, but you're not really opening those products to pull modern staples, cards that are currently good. Like, I'm not picking up a Legendary Collection hoping that I'm going to pull a Book of Moon, right? Like, I'm buying that product because Yugi is on it and I'm want to relive my kid years, right? Like, nostalgia brought me to this product. And unfortunately, they just haven't been able to capture that with the rest of the products. But I also think that with the recent increase in the pricing of YCSs, it's clear that Konami wants to try and make these ventures more profitable, but they're going about it the wrong way, and I think that's part of the cycle of things. As they make mistakes and as products sort of dwindle off and don't sell as well as they want, and as stores drop Yu-Gi-Oh as a product that they carry, I think that Konami will see what's happening, see the trends, and course correct. At least I'm hoping. I'm imagining that that's what's going to happen. But it's impossible to know for sure. There is a world where Konami just continues down this path and just sort of doubles down on the decisions that they've been making. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility of what could happen. And if that were to happen, I mean, yeah, the ship would sink, but I don't think that's going to happen. They've done a pretty good job. I mean, people have been complaining about the last 3 years of product releases, but there have been a lot of really good sets in the last 3 years. Like, game defining sets, like Duelist Alliance level changes to the game that were insane value. I mean, a lot of the sets are very top heavy in terms of their value, but Konami has done a pretty okay job of putting value at pretty much every rarity. So it, like, opening a super rare out of, let's, like, for example, what set was it that the Bestials came out? Was it Darkwing Blast? Like, pulling a super rare could have meant that you pulled a Magnemite or a Druisworm, which is insane. Those were great cards even when the set came out and continue to be great cards to this day. But they also put Fenrir at Ultra, which was an insane card as well. And then the secret rares also are kind of pretty banging. Like, you had, what was it, the Bestial Lubellion at secret rare. So it's like there was value at pretty much every rarity, meaning that you aren't necessarily hinging just on the secret rares in order to pull your value, like a lot of sets feel. Like, think back to like Rising Rampage. That set was basically just Appaloosa. Like, no other card in that set was worth pulling. Like, if you didn't pull an Appaloosa, you did not pull your value back. But if you pulled an Appaloosa, you pulled the God Box. So I think that it sort of comes and goes, and I think we're in one of those sort of phases where it's kind of going a little bit, and it's going to come back eventually. I think that Konami's going to figure out a way, because one of the things that has me hopeful is that the mega tins have promos again. Think back to the like 3 megatins before this, the 19 or not 19, the 20 and 21 and 22 megatins. None of them had promos. And the fact is that those tins were just not as good for value. The fact that this tin has promos at least has me hopeful that moving forward we're going to go back to a system where the tins have promos and they're worth pulling. The problem, again, is that the set is very top heavy. Like, all of the really good reprints were at the secret slot. Like, none of the ultras or supers had all that much value to speak of, which is kind of a problem. But I think that Konami is going to move in the right direction eventually. We just kind of have to sit back and wait for things to sort of settle down and for them to course correct. Is Yu-Gi-Oh dying? No. Is this not the best year for Yu-Gi-Oh in terms of products? Sure. Should we be worried about it? Probably not. Subscribe.